The warning siren screamed across the galactic skybridge as red lights flashed inside the royal cruiser of the Velari Empire. Their most advanced vessel was suddenly dying in the middle of enemy space. No one could understand how the systems collapsed so fast. The crew ran in panic while life support dropped to dangerous levels. Princess Salira of the Velari stood frozen in the control chamber, her silver gown glowing dimly under flickering lights. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't cry. Velari royalty never cried. Still, the fear on her face was clear. Her ship, her crew, and her life were hanging by a thread. She whispered to the guards to find someone who could fix it. Anyone, even a human. The last thing Commander Drex expected was to drag a human up to the royal chamber. He had found the man locked in a holding pod from a previous border skirmish. The human looked young, no battle scars, no armor, just dusty engineering tools strapped to his back. His name was Kael, and he barely raised his head when the guards approached. Kael didn't ask questions. He didn't salute or bow like the others. He saw the damaged ship systems, walked straight to the control panel, and started fixing wires like it was his own garage. The princess watched from behind a force field, unsure whether to be angry or grateful. For the first time, someone had ignored her rank, and she was curious about him. The ship's core was melting. Oxygen tanks were leaking. One wrong move could kill everyone aboard. Kael moved fast, hands steady, sweat running down his face. He didn't speak much, just gave short orders. Even the alien technicians obeyed him. Nobody else understood the human tech knowledge he had learned back. On Earth, minutes felt like hours. Salira pressed her hand to the glass as she saw the oxygen level begin to rise again. Lights returned to full brightness. One by one, monitors came alive. The ship breathed again, and so did its people. Kael wiped his hands and gave a small nod. His job was done, and he turned to walk away without asking for reward. But Velari law demanded a royal payment when one saved a monarch's life. The princess stepped through the glass, shocking the guards. Her eyes were locked on Kael, and her voice rang clear through the chamber. She asked him what he wanted: riches, ships, a planet. Kael just smiled and said he wanted nothing. The crew whispered in confusion. No one had refused a Velari gift before. The engineers exchanged looks. Even Commander Drex tilted his head. But Salira stepped closer and did something unthinkable. She removed the crystal pin from her hair, a symbol of her royal vow, and handed it to him. The room went silent. It was not just a gift. The pin meant something sacred in Velari culture. It was a bond, a promise, a future. Kael held it in his hand, not realizing the meaning. The guards looked at each other in panic. Had the princess just chosen a mate without approval? Or was this another kind of deal altogether? Salira didn't explain. She simply nodded and left. The room with her head high. Kael stood there, still holding the pin, unaware that the whole galaxy would soon learn about what just happened. The human who fixed a failing ship had now been marked with something far more powerful than royal payment. Back on the bridge, political advisors began scrambling. Messages flew across systems. The princess had offered something forbidden, and the human had unknowingly accepted it. This was more than survival now. It was the start of a new storm that neither side was ready for, and Kael, the quiet engineer from Earth, had no idea that saving a ship would tie his fate to a princess, a crown, and a law older than any human nation. Kael sat in the corner of the engineering bay, turning the crystal hairpin over in his hand. It looked small and harmless, but something about it felt heavy. Not in weight, but in meaning. He had seen machines melt and cities fall, but nothing ever made him feel nervous like this glowing little pin. The Velari crew avoided his eyes. The ones who had been shouting orders earlier now kept their distance. Even the guards who brought him in no longer gave him direct commands. Kael didn't know why their behavior changed so suddenly. He assumed they were just grateful, or maybe still recovering from the system failure. Princess Salira stood at the top level of the bridge, watching him from above. Her long red hair was pulled back in a new style, and she wore a dark royal suit instead of her earlier gown. She had not spoken to him again since she handed him the pin. But her eyes followed him like a silent question. Drex paced beside her, voice lowered as he argued with the royal advisor. He didn't trust Kael. He was a human, an outsider, a prisoner just hours ago. Now he was the most protected person on the ship. Some believed it was political madness. Others believed it was prophecy. But Drex believed it was trouble. Velari. Law was strict. Any exchange of royal blood-marked items was seen as a proposal. But only Salira knew if she had meant it. She had broken centuries of tradition with one simple act. Some saw it as a mistake. Others saw it as rebellion. For Kael, it was just a confusing gift from someone he had saved. That night, a silent message was sent from the royal ship to the Velari capital. The royal elders were informed. The Senate panicked. The idea of a human being involved with their princes triggered fear and anger across the core systems. Orders were sent to intercept the ship and return it to the homeworld immediately. Kael remained clueless. He spent the day repairing auxiliary systems and adjusting oxygen flow in the crew quarters. When a technician asked how he learned so much, Kael just smiled and said he used to fix broken cargo shuttles back on Earth. He didn't know he had become the center of a growing storm. Salira finally approached him again in the observatory chamber. The stars stretched out beyond the glass dome, and Kael was adjusting the temperature filters when her voice echoed softly behind him. She asked if he liked the stars. He nodded and said they felt quiet, unlike the ship. She stepped closer and asked if he knew what the hairpin meant. Kael hesitated. He said no. She told him it was sacred. A royal vow, not just a thank you, a promise. Then she asked if he wanted her to take it back. Kael looked at her, unsure how to answer. She didn't wait. She just smiled and walked away. The ship's eye warned of incoming vessels. Velari patrol units had changed course and were heading their way. Commander Drex called for a battle stance. He believed the patrols were sent to arrest the human. Salira refused. She locked the command bridge and declared the human under royal protection. It was a risky move. Defying the elders meant exile, possibly war. But Salira had made her choice. The crew was split. Half supported her, half feared her. Kael heard the whispers, the word blood bond being spoken in hushed tones. He still didn't fully understand what was happening. In the hangar bay, a group of senior officers gathered. In secret, they planned to hand Kael over once the patrol arrived. They feared the wrath of the crown more than their loyalty to the princess. One officer sneaked into the engine room, trying to trap Kael inside until the transfer, but Kael spotted the tampering. He fixed the panel and walked out just in time to see the officer disappear. Something didn't feel right anymore. The trust was fading. The ship was beautiful, but it now felt like a cage. He didn't want to become a symbol or a tool in someone's politics. Late that night, Salira stood alone in the gardens of the inner dome. She watched Kael from a distance as he quietly replaced a cracked light near the path. He wasn't like anyone she had met. He didn't chase power. He didn't try to impress. He just helped and moved on. She touched her crown and whispered something to herself. Then she turned and walked back to her quarters, knowing that the real storm hadn't even begun yet. Kael walked the corridor with his hands buried in his tool belt. The lights above him flickered slightly as he passed, but he didn't stop. Every system was running smoothly now. He had made sure of that. Still, something deeper in the ship felt off. Not mechanical, human, political, or worse, royal. The guards no longer escorted him. Instead, they watched him from a distance. Some nodded politely. Others turned away as he passed. He wasn't sure if they respected him or feared him. Since receiving the hairpin, nothing felt normal. And Kael had never wanted to be anything more than just useful. Princess Celira had been silent since their last conversation. He hadn't seen her at the engineering deck or the observatory. Still, he could feel her presence. It lingered in every hall he passed, in the silence of the officers, and in the way the ship's systems now prioritize his access clearance. Commander Drex stood at the navigation deck, eyes locked on the incoming royal patrol. He wore full armor now. His face was cold. He had argued with the princess again and lost. He believed Kael was a threat to the Empire, but protocol tied his hands. Until the patrol arrived, his job was to protect the human. Kael sat down beside the central processor and reviewed the core systems. Everything looked perfect. He should have felt relaxed. Instead, he felt watched. Not by people, but by the decisions closing in around him. The idea that a simple fix had caused a royal scandal was too large to process. Celira finally returned to the command deck. Her voice was sharp and calm as she took control from Drex. She announced that Kael would remain under her protection. No one would lay a hand on him without her order. Drex didn't argue, not this time. But his silence was heavier than any words. That night, Kael stood in the ship's observation tunnel again. He looked out at the stars, searching for something familiar. Earth wasn't visible from here. He wondered if anyone back home would believe this. A prisoner turned protector. An engineer holding a royal vow. It sounded like a bad joke. The patrol ships docked 2 hours later. Royal enforcers marched in with sharp uniforms and masked faces. Their leader, a tall woman with silver skin and golden eyes, demanded an audience with the princess. Celira welcomed them personally, dressed in her ceremonial armor instead of a gown. Kael was ordered to remain in his quarters. He didn't protest. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the hairpin again. It glowed faintly in his palm. He wondered if he should have given it back. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. But deep down, something about her gift had felt honest. The council envoy told Celira to surrender the human. She refused. They reminded her of the laws, the punishments, the exile. She remained silent until they finished. Then she spoke of loyalty, of life debts, of personal choice. And then she shocked them all again by declaring Kael as her chosen. The room exploded with noise. The guards drew weapons. The envoy shouted that she had no right. Celira raised one hand, and the room fell silent. She said the decision was made. If they wished to arrest her, they could. But they would not touch him while she breathed. In the halls, Drex received a silent message. He stared at the screen, then left without a word. Moments later, Kael's door opened. Drex entered, holding a sealed command case. He placed it on the table and told Kael that the princess had just broken the entire hierarchy of her people. Kael opened the case and found documents, keys, a royal seal, and a private communicator. It was everything needed to claim political sanctuary. Celira had sent it with one order: leave now. Before they take her away. Before the council does something irreversible. Kael stood frozen. He didn't want power. He didn't want a throne. He just wanted to help fix things. But he realized now that he had become part of something much bigger than circuits and wires. And walking away might mean letting her fall alone. Celira was taken to the upper deck for judgment. Her crown was removed, her armor stripped. But she stood proud. She didn't flinch when the council asked for her final words. She spoke only of choice. That sometimes the smallest act a life saved, a gift given, was more powerful than any law. Kael entered the chamber uninvited. Guards moved to stop him, but Drex raised a hand. Everyone froze. Kael walked straight to Celira, placed the hairpin back in her hand, and said only one word. Stay. The chamber stayed silent after Kael spoke. Every eye turned toward the council. The hairpin now rested again in Salira's hand. She looked at it with a strange emotion. Not shock. Not confusion. Something deeper. Something that reached beyond politics and titles. It was the weight of her own choice. The council envoy narrowed her golden eyes. She declared the moment a violation of royal law. A second offering of the pin meant the bond was sealed. Kael had just completed a ritual he didn't understand. But in Velari tradition, it was now recognized, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as her pair. Kael didn't step back. He didn't argue or defend himself. He just looked at Salira and nodded. She stood taller as if his presence gave her strength. The guards moved to separate them, but Salira lifted her voice and ordered everyone to stop. The chamber obeyed instantly. Commander Drek stepped forward. For once, he didn't try to block Kael. He didn't speak against the princess. He simply asked the council what they intended to do now. They could not ignore the sacred ritual. Even the elders feared the weight of tradition when made public. News spread across the Velari networks within hours. Images of the bond ceremony reached the outer colonies. Some praised the courage of the princess. Others called it betrayal. On Earth, the story broke with disbelief. A human engineer had just become the center of galactic controversy. Kael didn't leave the ship. He stayed close to the engine core, working silently as he always did. But now, every action was watched by cameras. Every word was recorded. He wasn't just fixing panels anymore. He was shaping the future of two civilizations by simply being there. Salira visited him that night without guards. She walked into the engine bay wearing a plain robe, not her usual royal attire. She said nothing for a moment. Then she asked if he truly understood what he had done. Kael said he didn't, but he also said he wasn't sorry. She nodded and sat beside him. They didn't speak of politics. They talked about stars, gravity wells, and ancient Earth machines. Salira laughed when Kael told her how he once fixed a toaster with ship wiring. For a moment, the royal weight lifted and only two people remained. Outside the ship, the patrol vessel still hovered. Orders from the capital had paused. The elders were debating whether to accept the union or break it by force. If they approved, it would change Velari culture forever. If they attacked, they risked war with Earth's allies. Drex gathered the senior officers secretly. He told them the time had come to choose sides. Some still believed Kael was a mistake. Others had watched him risk his life for the ship, the crew, and even the princess. Divided loyalty had now become a fracture in command. The next morning, Kael was summoned to the bridge. The council envoy stood waiting with a transmission from the Velari Emperor himself. The massive screen lit up with a stern face marked by age and power. His voice shook the walls as he demanded an explanation from his daughter. Salira stepped forward without fear. She told the Emperor everything, about the ship's failure, about the humans' bravery, about the vow. She did not beg, she did not plead. She simply spoke the truth and ended by saying this was her decision, not his. The Emperor stared for a long moment. Then, in a surprising move, he turned his attention to Kael. He asked if the human had ambition, if he wanted power. Kael shook his head and said he only wanted to help where he could. That was his life's work. Nothing more. The Emperor leaned back in silence. Then he gave a rare command. The royal seal would not be broken. The bond would be recognized. But Kael must come to Velaria and face the public. If the people accepted him, he would stay. If they did not, the vow would dissolve. Kael looked to Salira. She nodded softly. The choice was his now. The risk was heavy. But he had already crossed every line. There was no turning back. He accepted the challenge without hesitation. The course was set. In 2 days, the royal ship would land on the capital world. There, A human would walk into the heart of an empire that never accepted outsiders, and everything would depend on whether they saw a man who fixed wires or a human worthy of a crown. The capital world of Velaria rose like a golden gem against the blackness of space. Massive towers reached the sky, and floating bridges connected islands in the clouds. It was the heart of the empire. Every citizen, noble, and council member now waited for one thing: the arrival of the human. Kael stood in the transport bay, wearing a freshly pressed uniform given to him by Celira. It wasn't royal, it wasn't military, it was something new. A blend of both worlds. The fabric was dark gray, with silver thread lines that glowed slightly. It looked simple, but it was not ordinary. Celira walked beside him in her full ceremonial armor. Her face was calm, but her fingers twitched at her sides. This moment could define her future, or destroy it. She did not care about the throne. She cared about the choice. Her voice was soft when she told Kael to be himself and nothing more. Crowds gathered at the landing platforms. Security drones floated in the air. The press hovered on news skiffs, waiting to capture every step. The Empire had seen war. It had seen peace. But never had it seen a human walk from a royal ship wearing a mark of sacred bond. Kael stepped onto the platform. The sound of silence was louder than any cheer. Thousands of eyes followed him, some curious, some angry, some afraid. He walked slowly, not because he was nervous, but because every step felt heavier than the last. Celira followed behind him without speaking. The Emperor waited at the Hall of Decision. The room was made of crystal and metal, glowing with blue light from the floor. The throne sat high above, but the Emperor stood beside it instead. His expression showed no emotion. When Kael entered, the guards slammed their staffs once against the ground. The Emperor gestured toward a platform at the center. Kael stepped onto it and looked up. A circle of council elders stared down at him. Each one wore a mask carved from stone. Their voices echoed through the chamber as they asked questions. Who was he? Why had he accepted the vow? What did he seek? Kael answered honestly. He said he didn't understand the full weight of the vow at first. But he also said that didn't change what it meant now. He had risked his life to save their people. Not for a reward, not for a title, because it was the right thing to do. That was enough for him. Some council members looked pleased. Others remained silent. One elder leaned forward and asked the question no one wanted to speak aloud. Did the human love the princess, or was this simply honor? Kael paused. Then he looked directly at Celira and said he didn't know what love meant to Velari, but he would protect her always. The Emperor raised his hand. The room fell quiet again. He declared that the people would decide, not the council, not the crown, but the citizens of Velaria. The trial of bond would begin. Kael would spend 7 days among the people. If they accepted him, the vow would be complete. Kael nodded. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to argue. The path ahead was hard, but he had already survived worse. Back on Earth, survival was never given. It was earned. And if he had to earn his place here, then he would do it the same way. The first day, he worked with engineers fixing city power lines. He moved through storm towers and control hubs, helping without being asked. Some looked away. Others watched from shadows. But slowly, a few stepped forward to assist him. They saw his skill. They saw his patience. The second day, he joined medical teams in outer districts. There he repaired broken surgical machines and rewired an entire emergency wing. A child with glowing white eyes hugged his leg after being healed. A mother whispered, "Thanks," in the old Velari tongue. Kael said nothing. He only kept working. On the third day, trouble came. Protesters blocked his path in the mid-city dome. They held banners and shouted that no outsider could wear a sacred vow. One man threw a Metal pipe. Kael caught it mid-air and dropped it calmly. He did not strike back. He only nodded and walked on. Salira watched it all from her personal chamber. She wanted to run to him, to shield him. But she knew this was his journey. And he was walking. It with more strength than even she had expected. By the 5th day, something began to change. Whispers turned to quiet greetings. Children waved from balconies. Workers offered him water. Even those who had doubted started to step aside when he passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. Kael still didn't smile. He didn't boast. He just kept fixing what was broken. And the people of Velari had always respected those who built more than those who ruled. Asterisk on the 6th day, Kael was invited to the Forge of Balance, a sacred place where ancient engineers once designed the first Velari starships. The forge still operated as a symbol, not for war, but for harmony. Only those who earned the trust of the people could touch its controls. Kael entered the forge alone. The gate closed behind him with a loud seal. Inside, the walls pulsed with deep blue light. Floating tools moved in patterns above a glowing platform. At the center stood an unfinished engine core, old and broken, kept untouched for centuries. The trial was clear. If Kael could repair the heart of the old forge, he would earn the voice of the people. If he failed, the bond would be declared hollow. The system would reject the union, and Salira would be stripped of her royal rights. It was not just his future being judged. He moved with calm hands. He scanned the components, reading the damage patterns. The design was strange, older than anything he had worked on. But he saw something familiar in the way the core linked with its housing. It reminded him of Earth systems built in cold, quiet labs. Hours passed without a sound. Outside, crowds formed. Salira stood near the gates, eyes locked on the status screen. Drek stood beside her, arms crossed. He said nothing, but deep inside, even he hoped the human would succeed. Too much had changed to go back now. Inside the forge, Kael worked in silence. He didn't rush, he didn't panic. He understood the machine. It wasn't just parts. It had a rhythm, a soul. He adjusted cables, fused split joints, and rebalanced the crystal core. Sparks danced around him, but his hands never stopped. When the system lit green, a single chime echoed through the forge. The ancient engine pulsed once, then again, then fully powered. The walls shimmered with approval. Outside, the crowd gasped. On the main screen, the words flashed, "Core restored." Trial complete. Salira's chest rose with a deep breath. Her fists unclenched. She had believed in him from the first moment he touched her ship's broken panel. Now the Empire would have no choice but to accept the truth written by his actions. Not by blood, not by birth, but by earned respect. Kael exited the forge covered in sweat and dust. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. The people parted to make way for him. This time, there were no shouts, no protests. Only quiet nods and bent heads. He had become more than a visitor. He was now a builder of unity. The Emperor summoned both Kael and Salira to the Hall of Union. It was older than the council chambers, carved in stone and filled with starlight flowing from an open ceiling. At the center stood the flame of choice, a blue fire that never faded. A place of final declarations. The Emperor stood near the flame with both hands resting on his staff. His voice was strong as he told the people what had happened. A human saved a ship, refused reward, accepted a vow, faced protest, faced trial, and rebuilt what their best engineers had failed to restore. He asked Salira if her bond was true. She answered yes without hesitation. He asked Kael if he would stand by her, not as a servant, but as an equal. Kael looked into her eyes and answered. With a quiet but steady yes, the Emperor turned to the flame and lowered his staff. The blue fire rose higher, glowing white at the edges. The council bowed. The people cheered. Kael and Celira stepped forward and placed their hands near the flame. In that moment, the vow was no longer questioned. The bond was now law. The human was no longer an outsider. He was not Velari by blood, but by deed. Celira was still a princess. But now she stood beside someone who had no crown, no army, and no need for fame. He had something far rarer: trust. That night, lights filled the sky as ships signaled approval. Songs echoed from domes and towers. No one had expected this ending. But few doubted its strength. Change had come not through war, but through a man who fixed what others left broken. And in her private chamber, Celira finally smiled without hiding it. She knew the real trial had not just been for Kael. It had been for her too. Peace returned to the capital, but tension still lived in quiet corners. Not all voices had cheered for the bond. In the depths of the outer Senate halls, whispers grew louder. Old traditions, long held and never questioned, were now seen as broken. Some called it progress. Others called it weakness. Kael continued working in the lower domes. He had no throne, no chamber, and no guards. He preferred it that way. The people respected him now, but he didn't live for their praise. He lived to repair, to build, and to keep moving. Even with the royal mark, he remained the same man. Celira joined him often, not in armor or royal robes, but in simple wear. She walked beside him without guards, asking questions and listening closely. She didn't pretend to understand earth tools, but she admired the way Kael solved problems without needing command. She learned more from him than from a dozen tutors. But something changed in the city's tone. Security tightened. Messages were delayed. A senator named Vorn emerged as a rising voice of opposition. He wore white robes and spoke softly, but his words struck deep. He claimed the empire had been poisoned by outside hands. Vorn gathered support quickly. Nobles afraid of losing power backed him. Generals who had remained silent now gave nods. In public, he never called for violence. He only demanded the bond be reviewed. The law, he said, must be corrected. One vow should not change thousands of years of rule. The emperor noticed the shift. He called private meetings, but answers came slow. Velari had always feared internal rebellion more than outside war. And now that fear returned. Except this time, it wasn't led by armies. It was led by belief. And belief spread faster than fire. Kael was warned by Drex in private. The commander had grown to respect him, though he rarely said it aloud. He told Kael to stay away from the core domes for a while. The protests were growing. Kael nodded but refused to hide. He had faced harder threats in dead space with nothing but a torch. Celira walked into the Senate chamber during a heated session. Vorn stood in the center, questioning the emperor's decision. She interrupted without waiting to be invited. Her voice was cold. She asked Vorn one question. Had any of them risked their lives to save the people when the royal ship failed? Vorn did not answer. Instead, he turned the words around. He asked her if she had chosen Kael to prove something, or if she truly believed he belonged. Celira's answer silenced the room. She said it was not about belief. It was about truth. He did not ask to be accepted. He earned it. The chamber split after that moment. Some clapped. Others stood and walked out. The emperor sighed, knowing the balance had shifted again. Power in Velaria was delicate. Even a single crack could spread across worlds if left unchecked. And that crack had now become a question of legacy. Kael was targeted that evening, not by soldiers, but by shadows. A group of masked saboteurs intercepted him near the transport. Lines, they didn't carry weapons, they carried a message. They told him to return to Earth before things burned. They told him that even machines couldn't fix culture. Kael listened quietly. Then he walked past them without a word. He didn't respond. He didn't look back. He simply returned to the dome and repaired a broken air regulator for a nursery. Pod. The message was clear. He was not afraid, not of threats, not of hate, not of history. The Emperor met with Celira that night. He placed a heavy scroll on the table between them. It contained a proposal from Vorn's supporters. A vote to remove the royal right to bond with off-worlders. A complete reversal of her vow. Celira looked at the scroll, and then at her father. He asked her if she regretted it. She shook her head. He asked her if she was ready to fight for it. She said yes. Then he handed her the seal of command. The Emperor would not stop the vote, but he would give her the right to challenge it before the entire empire. Kael stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, unaware of the scroll. He looked at the stars like he always did. Fixing things had always been simple, but this was different. This was about fixing what people believed could never change. And sometimes, the hardest things to repair were not machines, but hearts. Asterisk. The day of the vote arrived with a red sky above Velaria. Every citizen, from the cloud cities to the ground domes, paused to watch the proceedings. The council tower had opened its core chamber to the public for the first time in 50 years. The future of the royal bond was now on trial. Kael stood beside Celira at the base of the crystal stairs. He wore the same simple uniform from the day he arrived. She wore armor once again, but it was not the shining gold of ceremony. It was battle gray, marked not by titles, but by decisions. Her eyes stayed on the gate as it opened. Vorn entered first, flanked by nobles and generals. They took their seats on the high bench. The Emperor remained absent from the chamber. It was his choice. The people would witness this without royal interference. It was a test not of blood, but of truth. The council voice began with the old rights. Then they presented the petition to revoke the foreign bond clause. A single vote would decide. But before the cast, Celira was granted the final words. She stepped forward alone. The chamber fell silent as her voice echoed through the dome. She spoke not of Kael's heritage, but of his actions. She reminded them who repaired the systems when their own engineers failed, who stayed calm in crisis, who faced their traditions without fear. Then she turned to the crowd and said that Velaria had always claimed to value strength. But true strength was not in war or in walls. It was in choosing to grow. Some council members lowered their heads. Others looked to Vorn for guidance. He remained still, face calm but unreadable. Then the moment came. The vote began. Each council member placed a token in the well of light. A white glow meant removal. A blue glow meant preservation. Kael did not watch the well. He watched Celira. Her shoulders were steady. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. She had stood for him before anyone else believed in him. Now she stood for the right to choose, not just for herself, but for every Velari who came after her. The lights finished counting. The well glowed blue. The chamber burst into quiet gasps. Vorn stood and bowed slightly before leaving without a word. The council remained seated, unsure how to react. But the message was clear. The vote had passed. The bond would remain untouched. Outside, cheers began to rise. Ships blinked signals across the sky. The people had chosen to accept what once felt impossible. Kael and Celira exited the chamber hand in hand. For the first time, no one tried to stop them. No one looked away. No one doubted them. The Emperor met them at the Sky Pavilion. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at both of them for a long moment. Then he placed his hand on Kael's shoulder and nodded. It was not a royal order. It was a father's acceptance. Quiet, simple, and real. In the weeks that followed, Kael became something new. Not a prince, not a general, but a builder of unity. He worked with both human and Velari engineers to design bridges across planets. He taught students how to repair without fear, how to solve without pride. Salira continued her duties, but now her path had changed. She no longer ruled from behind the shield of protocol. She walked with the people. She listened. She acted. Her strength no longer came from armor, but from trust earned through fire. Some systems still resisted the bond. Not all minds change with law, but over time change arrived. Not through force, but through story. The story of a girl who gave a pin, and a man who chose to stay. One evening, Kael stood in the gardens of the outer palace, looking at a new device the students had built. It ran on old Velari power combined with Earth tech. It hummed quietly, balancing between two sources. Just like them, Salira approached and placed her hand over his. No words were needed. The stars above glowed brighter than before. Not because they were different, but because they were finally seen through shared eyes. In the end, Kael never claimed a throne. He never asked for titles. But in every home, on every world that followed the path of peace, his name became a word for something rare, a promise kept.